You testified yesterday. You have to give careful attention to gendered stereotypes. Correct?
That is correct.
This was the first question? He started off with that one? Oh my God.
When you're talking about intimate partner violence, you have to pay attention to gendered stereotypes. And during your testimony, you in fact paid attention to gendered stereotypes, correct?
I'm not sure what you mean.
Well,
what?
You said we were going to have to pay attention to gendered stereotypes, and then you testified at length where you referenced both men and women. You paid attention to those stereotypes during the course of your testimony, correct?
What I was saying was you have to pay attention to gendered stereotypes when you're conducting these evaluations. You can't assume all the time that the male is the perpetrator and the female is the victim. You have to go into the evaluation understanding that the male also could be the victim.
He was hoping she would say that.
In fact, you're aware that there are large-scale studies that do say that IPV towards males does exist.
Of course.
Okay. And every time you referred to the characteristic of a victim of intimate partner violence yesterday, you used the pronouns she or her, didn't you?
I was using the she and her pronouns in this case because my determination was, as I stated, that Ms. Heard was the victim of intimate partner violence. That is why I was using the she, her pronouns.
You, in fact, said women gets into the relationship for all the right reasons. That's what you said. The woman gets into the relationship for all the right reasons.
Yeah.
And then you say difficult for victim to extricate herself. You go on to say that she can and she should. Over and over, you use she, right?
I believe in this case I did because I was referencing this case where I found Ms. Heard to be the victim of intimate partner violence. It doesn't mean that men don't get into the relationships for all the right reasons too. I believe they do.
That's total bullshit. I'm just pausing it here. That's total bullshit because at the very beginning they asked her in a general sense without even asking at all if she had any information or knowledge of the Amber Heard case at the beginning. Like they explicitly asked her on like a professional level. It was explicitly asked on a professional level and not on a level of the case. How the fuck is she gonna say this? Oh my God. So
Nearly
she knew?
Every time you referenced the perpetrator of IPV, you used he or him, didn't you?
And it goes back to the same reasoning as I'm describing my understanding and my evaluation in this matter. Of course, men can be perpetrators and victims of intimate partner violence. That's well established in the research, and that's well established in my clinical practice as well.
Isn't the reason that you used the pronouns that you did that you almost always testify on behalf of a woman?
That's not correct.
You don't even remember the last time you testified on behalf of a man.
Well, I don't testify on behalf of someone. I testify as to the results of my evaluation. I frequently treat and assess male victims of childhood sexual abuse who are coming into treatment for abuse by their Boy Scout leader, by their coach, by their teacher, by a trusted adult. I see them in therapy. I see them in forensic matters, in criminal cases. So I treat and evaluate men all the time.
I didn't ask you about treatment. I asked you about testimony. You broke out your practice between treatment and testimony. I'm not asking you about treatment. When's the last time you testified on behalf of a man?
I testified recently in a deposition on behalf of a man who was traumatized because he was wrongly convicted.
At the time of your
I wonder by who?
6 weeks ago, you couldn't remember a single time you had testified on behalf of a man.
I testified in my deposition that I testified in a case of a man who was wrongly convicted about 20 years and suffered physical and sexual violence in prison, and I detailed the traumatic effects of that happened on that gentleman.
All right, why don't we take a look at your deposition?
Sure.
Uh-oh. Here we go. In prison by another man. Yes, that's right. That's right. So not a woman.
Right.
Exactly. Fucking
Yes.
exactly.
Thank you.
All right. transcript of the deposition that you gave March 28th, 2022, correct?
Yes.
All right. Let's go to page 77.
Oh boy. Oh boy.
Let's look at,
I love how the lawyer just says it too.
page
Just
78, line 8.
Does not
So
give a
you can't
fuck.
recall a single instance where you were hired by the attorney representing the male in an IPV matter, correct?
In an IPV matter, not in a trauma matter or a child sexual abuse matter.
Okay, so that's the distinction. You don't have any recollection of ever testifying on behalf of a male in an IPV matter.
As I stated yesterday, the very first case that I testified in was in a same-sex intimate partner violence where the man was the victim of another man. I routinely treat and assess same-sex couples where then the female can be
Again.
the perpetrator of another female, and the male can be the perpetrator or a victim of his partner.
Again.
So let me get this. You testified in a case where one male is alleged to have engaged in IPV against another male.
Correct.
All right. Okay. But that's the only one you remember. That's the only one you remember.
No, I've done this frequently. As you well know, most cases don't go to trial. I've worked on hundreds and hundreds of cases. You've limited
So
to
it's all the
testimony.
ones
Many
that you
cases
can't
don't
see.
come to trial, but I've
Of
issued
course.
reports and worked on many cases of same-sex intimate partner violence where men are the victims.
But I did ask you about testimony, and I limited the question to testimony. And the
You
only
did?
testimony that you remember is the same-sex couple, right?
There were multiple same-sex couples, I believe, that I testified.
That you testified in court
Of
at that
course.
I believe so, yes.
trial. All right, but you didn't remember that in March.
I did remember that in March.
Okay. You're a professional witness, correct?
That's not correct.
No? You make hundreds of thousands of dollars a year testifying in court, correct?
Not testifying in court, I conduct thorough, comprehensive psychological evaluations of individuals who are involved in a court case. The majority of those cases never show up in the
Professional
courtroom.
witness.
And half of my practice and half of my income is about my clinical work with people who are coming to me for therapy.
I didn't ask you about the other half of your income. I'm asking
Nobody
you whether you
cares.
made hundreds of thousands of dollars a year testifying as an expert witness in court.
As you're phrasing that question, that's not correct. That would be the amount of income that I generate from my forensic practice. I testify perhaps maybe once or twice a year. Most of the work is done behind the scenes in evaluating individuals and issuing reports.
But you'll agree with me that a big part of that practice is providing expert witness testimony.
That's not correct.
No? That's not a big part of your practice.
If I testify twice a year, that's not a big part of my practice. All the other time is doing the work for the cases and evaluating the individuals and issuing reports.
Uh-oh. Uh-oh.
All right. What percentage of work do you devote to forensic psychology?
As I stated yesterday, I say half and half clinical, half forensic, but I also have a substantial amount of time that I use in the professional activities and serving on professional boards.
Mm-hmm.
So what portion of your practice do you provide expert witness services?
I think you're using the expert witness services synonymous with the forensic psychology part of the practice. So the forensic psychology practice, what I do here today is one part of it, and it's a smaller part as opposed to all of the evaluations and individuals that I'm assessing.
Your practice is successful enough that you maintain your offices on Madison Avenue in New York, correctly?
Correct. I've had that office since 2005.
That's convenient.
And you're sufficiently successful at your forensic work that you're able to perform unpaid work at a hospital, correct?
Correct, and I also do pro bono work as well.
There. In fact, you actually instruct others on the use of expert testimony in court cases, correct?
On the use and understanding trauma and violence abuse in the courtroom and how to, for advocates and people who could not have this level of training or experience.
she's
how to
infected
come
other
into the
people,
courtroom and
too.
talk about very difficult
It's not
issues
just
of
her.
domestic violence. Yes.
All right, can we pull up PX 1241?
Coaching other people how to be sexist as well. That's great. How convenient that is.
Do you recognize that document?
Yes, it looks like the front page of a PowerPoint presentation
And it's a PowerPoint presentation given by whom?
by myself and Mary Ann Dutton, who is a very well-known and respected researcher and clinician in the area of domestic violence.
Uh-oh.
And what's the topic of the PowerPoint that you're giving?
Expert witness testimony in cases involving domestic violence.
Ah. But she doesn't
Who
tell
did you
people how to...
give this presentation to?
That was to the National
Huh.
Clearinghouse for the Defense of Battered Women. That is an
Oh,
organization that
look at
provides
that.
legal services to women who have assaulted or killed their partners in self-defense, and mostly people who
How
these
interesting.
individuals, the women who they've seen in treatment are through shelter-based programs or through advocates, and those are individuals who don't really know how to come into the courtroom and talk, and that's what this presentation and training was for.
I'm going to move PX 1241 into evidence.
Any objection? All right, 1241 in evidence. Do you want it published?
Oh,
Yes,
boy.
let's publish it to the jury. Thank you.
Okay.
Just so you know, we're going to keep going with this until it gets back to the live one. Then we'll go back to that, and I'll finish this off whenever they do a break. That way I can be kind of like intermittently caught up, you know? Just
All
let
right.
me know when the other one starts.
Why don't we pull up PX 1242?
Okay.
Do you recognize this document?
Yes, this also looks like a PowerPoint presentation that I gave.
Oh, how convenient.
What is the name of this PowerPoint presentation?
This is called The Use of Psychological Experts in Cases of Domestic Violence. It was presented to the Kings County Bar Association, which is in Brooklyn. And what this presentation talked about was some of the things that I talked to you all about yesterday, the myths and misconceptions in intimate partner violence, when women use force, what happens if they drop protective orders, how they present in court. And that's what this presentation was to attorneys at the Bar Association.
Okay. But this is another presentation that you gave
Another one.
as to the use of psychological experts, and you gave it to a bar association.
Right, they were prosecutors and defense attorneys in attendance at that Bar
Right.
Association.
At your deposition, you testified that you were going to be paid $100 an hour for your time in this case.
I did not testify to that.
You did not?
That's an error in the transcript.
Oh, that's not right.
That's correct.
So, and you corrected the transcript?
We did not do an errata in the transcript at this point.
So you knew there was an error in the transcript, but you didn't fix it?
There were several errors in the transcript.
But you didn't fix any of them?
There was no time to fix them, that's correct.
All right.
I like how, like, for some reason, her answer to, so you did this wrong. And then the lawyer asks, 'cause it's the same thing with the form. They're like, so you just didn't care that you did this wrong? And then in her mind, a good answer is, well, actually, I did a bunch of other stuff wrong too. It's like, really, like it's the second time she's done this. She's like, I've been doing this wrong for years. Who gonna stop me?
So you're not being paid $100 an hour. How much are you getting paid?
I'm being paid $500 an hour.
$500.
Oh, wow. I wonder why she didn't correct that. I wonder why. Isn't that interesting that she didn't correct something that would make her look worse? Wow, look at that.
An hour. And that's what, and that's the bill you sent for your deposition, right? $500 an hour.
Correct.
Right. You submitted a number of disclosures in this case. You have not formed an opinion as to whether Mr. Depp committed intimate partner violence against Miss Heard, correct?
Correct. I formed the opinion that Ms. Heard's report of the intimate partner violence is consistent with what we know in the literature about intimate partner violence.
Then how could you diagnose her with PTSD? What?
You have a limited role here comparing individual data to group data and then just determining whether it's consistent.
But then why would she say at the beginning of it, using the gendered pronouns, as if she is referencing the case, if she didn't believe that that's what happened? Why, like, ding, 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 got him, uh-oh.
Right?
I wouldn't say it's a limited role, but that's generally correct.
You wouldn't use the word limited role?
A limited role in terms of how we go about a forensic evaluation,
you
not
know
a
whether-
limited role in this case.
Do you remember whether you used limited role in your deposition?
I don't. If you have it in front of me, you probably think I did, but sure.
And you have no independent knowledge of the facts underlying the alleged abuse, correct?
I have the knowledge of the plethora of documents that I've reviewed in this case.
No, I'm asking you your independent firsthand knowledge. You have none of that, right?
You mean whether I was there?
Yeah, you weren't there.
Of course not.
Okay.
Okay. Okay.
And you're not testifying to the veracity, the truthfulness of any of the allegations.
Correct. I'm testifying to the consistency of the data points of all the different documents,
Here we
including
go.
the psychological testing and the clinical evaluation that I conducted of Ms. Heard, and
Here
how
we
that
go.
comports with the therapy records and all the other documents and the photos and texts that I reviewed.
It's not live yet.
And you have no personal knowledge of any abuse.
Correct, personally. Correct.
Right. And all you know is what Ms. Heard self-reported to you and others.
That's not correct.
Because you did collateral interviews?
And I reviewed medical records, and I reviewed other witness statements of what they witnessed and what they saw.
And all of those statements that you reviewed, those were statements that started with Ms. Heard, correct?
Not necessarily.
Well, the medical records did, didn't they?
Well, the medical records, if she's self-reporting what happened to her, sure. I mean, that's what we do when we go to a physician. We say, I have a headache. We're self-reporting our difficulties.
Everything Ms. Heard reported directly to you was after she was sued by Mr. Depp in this case, correct?
Correct.
Ah, okay. So after she gets sued, then she starts reporting a bunch of stuff. Wow, what a fucking surprise that is. How convenient the timing in that. Not a client, by the way.
And you didn't meet Ms. Heard until, what, September 2019?
That was the first evaluation appointment, correct.
How'd you get engaged?
Engaged?
How'd you get hired to do this work?
I was contacted by the legal team.
Or were you interviewed by her legal team as to whether you were going to testify here?
I was not.
You were not interviewed.
I was not.
You were contacted.
Correct.
Had you worked with that legal team before?
I had.
Yeah. So they already knew who you were, right?
Correct.
Right. And at any time that you were working with Ms. Heard or assessing Ms. Heard, she could have chose to fire you, correct?
I suppose her legal team could have chose to fire her. I was not her. She is not my client. The legal team is the one who hires me. I am responsible to the legal team, not Ms. Heard.
And the legal team that hired you already knew who you were because you worked together previously.
And clearly they knew of my expertise in this area of intimate partner violence.
I'm
and
sure
traumatic
that's
stress,
why,
which is
yes.
why they contacted me. to
All the
work on this
pieces are
matter.
coming together.
All right.
Yep.
Several times yesterday you used language about assessing Ms. Heard's relationship with Mr. Depp. Do you remember talking about that?
Sure.
You can't assess a relationship without talking to both parties, can you?
You certainly can get a lot of information from one party.
Oh, here we go.
Absolutely.
Different
But you're
language.
Especially when it's buttressed by other documents, including 4 years of therapy records and couples therapy records. You can get a lot of information based on those documents in that contemporaneous reports of the relationship.
Respectfully, I didn't ask whether you get a lot of information. I asked whether you can assess a relationship without talking to both parties.
I believe you can. There are certainly limitations inherent in that, but you certainly can.
Uh-oh.
You talked to Ms. Heard for, what, approximately 30 hours.
It's back on? Okay, all right, thank God. Here we go, boys. Here we fucking go. She's roasted. No, you can't. I know you can't. It's just, yeah, this is so good. Oh my God, it's a one-sided assessment. Yeah, she provided a one-sided assessment with no data at all. How is this, like, it's, wow. How many times has this bitch done this before? You know what I mean? And not get called out for it. She said at least 50, right? And then she's infecting other people with the same fucking bullshit. All right, here we go.
Right?
Correct.
How long have you spent with Mr. Depp?
I did not spend any time with Mr. Depp. It was my understanding that he did not sit for a psychological evaluation.
Right. In fact, you never met Mr. Depp, have you?
I have not.
But you purport to be able to assess the relationship between Mr. Depp and Ms. Heard?
Wow.
But I also read Mr. Depp's transcripts of his testimony. I watched his deposition testimony. I reviewed his medical records. I reviewed his text messages. So it's not necessarily totally blind. I did have information, although I'm not making a conclusion about Mr. Depp himself.
It's not totally blind. It's just partially blind. Yeah, I don't completely not know what I'm talking about. I just don't know what I'm talking about. But it's not completely. I'm only half clueless.
Is the standard now not necessarily totally blind?
I'm
That's
not
how
sure.
you assess the relationship? If it's not necessarily totally blind, I can assess it?
No, we assess as clinical psychologists relationships all the time. That's what we're trained to do. Certainly someone who's been trained in intimate partner violence to understand and look for the dynamics that happen in that relationship. And then when we have external data that supports what the individual is telling us, way before this legal case even came on the scene, that becomes very strong data to support that conclusion.
Let's talk about some of that data.
Sure.
All right? You chose to conduct some collateral interviews,
Correct.
right?
Not with Johnny
and
Depp.
interviewed Dr. Bonnie Jacobs.
Correct.
And you looked at her notes,
Correct.
and you know that Miss Jacobs, Dr. Jacobs, doesn't know anything about the version of what happened in Australia until Miss Heard had already been sued, correct?
I believe she was not in treatment with Dr. Jacobs at the time the Australia incident occurred, so that would be correct. She did reach out to Dr. Connell Cohen about Australia, who she was treating with at that time contemporaneously.
All right, I'll ask you about Dr. Cohen. We'll get there. All right. So
We'll get there.
You know that Miss Heard stopped seeing Dr. Jacobs in August 2014,
That's correct.
and she didn't go back until after she got sued, right?
I believe that's the date. I'd have to look to make sure, but I believe that you're correct.
Yeah. And you said you reviewed you interviewed Dr. Connell Cohen.
That's correct.
And you also reviewed his deposition testimony.
That's correct.
How convenient? Of course.
And you know that he testified that when he was treating a patient, he assumes the patient is telling the truth, correct?
I believe he said something to that effect in his
To
deposition.
some degree, you have to.
And
If he has no reason to believe otherwise, if there's no other data to believe otherwise, that your patient's not being totally honest with you, then you believe what they're saying.
Right. No other data to believe otherwise, but the sole thing that's happening is Miss Heard is talking to Mr. Cohen, or Dr. Cohen.
I wouldn't say she's talking to him, she's going to him for therapy, and he's using his clinical psychological expertise to understand the connection between her symptoms and what she's reporting, what's going on in her life.
All right. But you understand that
So
he
talking,
testified that
not
he
talking.
assumes the patient is telling the truth.
Again, like
Again,
this is the vocabulary rephrasing him as you see what she did, right? is she's just trying to rephrase him as an authority as to not discredit him not really understanding what's going on. You see what I'm saying? Again, like, that's why she does that.
Understand that statement in his testimony. I have a lot more rich information of having spoken to him for 2 hours and reviewing his clinical notes.
He testified he was making a leap of faith with respect to that, right? With respect to the truthfulness.
Again, that was not my understanding of speaking with him and reviewing his notes. I'm aware he testified something to that effect.
All right. And you testified yesterday that Dr. Cohen never diagnosed Ms. Heard with any personality disorders. You remember that?
Yes.
In fact, Dr. Cohen's deposition testimony reflects the fact that he doesn't make diagnoses, correct?
Correct. And I asked him specifically, did he have any indications that even if he doesn't, as his practice, use them, does she meet criteria for a personality disorder? And he told me she did not.
All right. So you asked him specifically with respect to a topic that you haven't disclosed in your expert report, and then he made a conclusion that's reflected in no document.
It's reflected in my notes. It's reflected in his notes about what he's treating. He's treating the symptoms. He's not focusing on the diagnosis, but he is treating the symptoms.
You talked about Dr. Cohen's concern for Ms. Heard's safety.
Correct.
He wasn't talking about her physical safety, was he?
Yes, he was.
No, he was talking about her emotional safety. Wasn't that what he was talking about?
He was concerned for both.
Okay. Did Dr. Cohen testify that he never had the feeling that Johnny intended to hurt Ms. Heard?
I believe he said that. I mean, he talked about Mr. Depp being very
See,
poor.
again, minimization of things that are not beneficial for her side. I believe he said that versus giving out all of his titles and accolades in another profession, in like another context as well. And it's like, well, it wasn't physical. Well, it was. It could have been. You see this? Like, it's just it's continuously misleading. Continuously misleading.
Controlled, and that's what made him, Dr. Cohen, concerned, because in those moments when he was not controlled, that he could accidentally seriously hurt Ms. Heard.
Let's do this again. Ms. Heard told Dr. Cohen that Mr. Depp was poorly controlled, correct?
That's not correct.
Okay. He determined that from the treatment he was providing Ms. Heard.
And he also had a couple session with Mr. Depp, and he also had correspondence with Dr. Kipper. So he had other information as to Mr. Depp's functioning.
All right, you talked about Dr. Banks.
Correct.
Dr. Banks was doing relationship consulting, right? Consultation on relationship.
Correct.
And Dr. Banks only met with them once.
Correct.
All right. And you did an interview, I think, with Ms. Heard's mother, Paige.
That's correct.
All right. You'd agree with me that a person's family member is not the most objective source of information?
Sometimes you have to certainly control for that the person may be wanting to be protective of their daughter, of course.
And you interviewed.
So they're using her own family members as evidence. Wow, what an interesting turn of events. Sometimes, yeah, exactly. Like, it's just, especially with like the history that she had with her family. Like, I mean, come on, it's not even a question.
Ms. Paige Heard, after Mr. Depp had already sued Amber Heard.
Right. The entirety of my work in this case happened, obviously, after the lawsuit.
Did you review, in that context, any of Paige Heard's text messages with Mr. Depp?
I'm not sure if I saw them with Mr. Depp. I do believe I saw some with Miss Heard. I mean, Miss Paige Heard, Amber Heard's mother, did talk to me about her relationship with Mr. Depp.
And she told you that she loved Johnny even after Amber alleged abuse, correct?
She did.
All right.
So even her own mom is against her, or was against her? Jesus. I mean, that's her own mom. Like, god damn, man. That's bad.
Now, you testified that you approach a forensic evaluation with, I think you said it again today, a healthy degree of skepticism.
Correct.
All right.
Well, I don't know about that. I don't know about that.
This skepticism didn't cause you to conduct interviews with, for instance, Laurel Anderson.
Right, I did not speak to Dr. Laurel Anderson.
And you chose not to speak to Dr. Laurel Anderson because you disagreed with Dr. Laurel Anderson?
That's not correct.
All right. What did Dr. Laurel Anderson do on behalf of Ms. Heard and Mr. Depp?
She was a couples therapist that they sought. They had 4 couples sessions. As I stated yesterday, one of them in which Mr. Depp stormed out of. She did have a long...
I like how she uses Johnny Depp storming out of couples therapy with no context around why he did it or anything about that. And like also, like let's say you use that and you want to go forward with this. So this is an instance that is documented of Johnny Depp being in a hostile situation that stresses him out, and he's not violent. He removes himself from the situation. So in a way, it actually disproves a lot of what they're trying to say in the first place. Because like, yeah, there was something stressful that happened. He was getting angry and upset. He immediately went out and he went to smoke a fucking joint. He's getting stressed out. I know plenty of people that do that. Like, yeah, it's like they removed himself from the situation. That's the smart thing to do. That's what you're supposed to do. Like, whenever I read about this, I heard about this stuff. Like, what's always been the advice I've gotten? If it's like, if you're in a hostile, violent situation or a situation that makes you really upset or angry, what do? You remove yourself from the situation. So he's doing the exact thing that, like, I think that's the general advice everybody gets.
Yes, evaluation or interview with Mr. Depp individually and with Ms. Heard individually. And then she saw them intermittently after the May 21st, 2016 incident,
school, yeah.
and when they were filing for divorce.
So you didn't interview Laurel Anderson, but you know what she did. How'd you figure that out?
Because we had her redacted notes and her deposition.
All right. And you understood from her deposition that Dr. Anderson didn't believe Ms. Heard to be a victim of spousal abuse?
I believe those were her words, yes.
And you also understood from her deposition that Mr. Depp had not had a very long history of being violent with any of his wife or women.
That she said that as well.
Yeah.
But that's something about Ms. Heard significantly triggered him. She talked about that as well.
I wonder what that could possibly be. What could it possibly be about Amber Heard that caused him to get upset? I wonder why. And like, this is the thing, is like saying triggered him. It's like, that's like, it's his own fault or something like that. You know what I mean? Like, oh, somebody gets triggered. Oh, they're upset. It's like, oh, this is something that was, it happened. The language implies that it is something that occurs internally through no external stimuli. You see what I'm saying? So like, he's getting upset at fucking Amber Heard because of something that is internal that is triggered with him. You see what I'm saying? Like like he's, you see how this like is say gaslighting? Well, it's not gaslighting. It's much different than that.
And Dr. Anderson thought that Mr. Depp had been, her words, well controlled, I think for almost 20 or 30 years, correct?
Up until this point, I believe she said.
Right. I know that you testified that you reviewed medical records.
Yes.
All right. So, you know Miss Heard had a personal nurse.
Correct.
Erin Filati.
Correct.
You didn't interview Miss Filati either.
I did not.
It's convenient.
You know she spent time with Miss Heard on a regular basis during her relationship with Mr. Depp.
So, like, she just basically took everything that Amber Heard said completely with no evidence whatsoever, and not only with no evidence whatsoever, but actively disregarding resources that she could have used for evidence. And she just went with it just to fucking railroad this this diagnosis down that was improperly conducted. Like, it's unbelievable. This is $500 an hour. Oh my God.
Correct. I had her clinical notes that I reviewed.
Right. And you reviewed her deposition testimony.
Correct.
Some of which the jury's heard, right?
I believe so.
Yeah. And you reviewed the nursing notes.
Yes.
So you know that Ms. Heard admitted to a history of eating disorders to Ms. Filati, correct?
I know that's in the notes. That's nowhere else in any other record, so I'm not sure where that came from.
But you...
She said yesterday that Amber Heard didn't have any history of eating disorder at all. She said the exact opposite yesterday. Isn't that something? Isn't that just a little bit of something? Wow, that's such an interesting coincidence that she said the opposite. But then if you call her on that, she would say, oh, well, that was just her analysis, and that's not, evidence or something like that. Again, it's obviously disingenuous. If somebody asks if there's any evidence, I think that any reasonable person would assume that a previous person who's worked with them noting down a eating disorder is evidence of some case of it. Changing the story. Yeah, it's just changing. Like, it's so obvious. Like, any reasonable person would consider that.
You relied on everybody else's notes.
And there are some things that I disagreed with, like I disagree with Dr. Laurel Anderson about it being mutual abuse.
Right. So the stuff you disagree with, you disregard, and the rest you keep, correct?
That's not correct.
Well, I think that's actually pretty much right. Yeah, it's just about, all right, that's a good one. Yep. That's a pretty good summarization of it. Yep, there you go. Disagree with the stuff I don't like, agree with the stuff I do like. All right, well, there we go.
But that's what you did.
That's not correct.
All right. You know that Ms. Filati saw Ms. Heard immediately after she returned from Australia.
I'd have to look at the notes again to be sure, but I know she did see her when she came back from Australia. That's correct.
Did Ms. Filati document any injuries to Ms. Heard in her notes?
I did not see that in the record.
Okay, so you looked at her notes, and there's no injury to Ms. Heard documented in her nurse's notes following her return from Australia?
Correct.
Okay.
Wow.
You talked about...
Once again, the personal accounts from the person who is clearly and obviously fucking biased are complete differences from what actually is. And this is what I find to be so funny. Like, how is this even a conversation? Every single time that there is any sort of evidence, nothing can prove this at all. And if anything, all of the evidence proves the opposite. And I think also, think about it like this. So if Amber Heard is recording Johnny Depp without his consent, without him being aware of it, like he did whenever I guess they were in the car together, and you can clearly see that it was Amber Heard that was recording and not Johnny, because Johnny's voice was farther away, so it had to be Amber Heard's phone that was closer to her face, or closer to her, and that's why it was easier to hear her. So it's very obvious this wasn't some sort of microphone in the computer, or sorry, in the car or something like that, or on a computer. This was 9 times out of 10, I almost guarantee it's on her phone. So she is intentionally recording him to incriminate him in the future. So number one, doesn't that seem pretty fucking sketchy right from the beginning? And number two, if you are recording theoretically every bad thing or bad action this person has taken, and what you submit as evidence is just a conversation in a car where he says, I'm scared of you and we need to get our shit together. The understanding I would have is that this is probably about as bad as it gets in terms of him instigating violence or aggression. Because if it wasn't, then she would have recorded him doing that. But she didn't. See that? Like, see how this doesn't make sense?
About this concept, which you then defined, lethality.
Yeah.
And you testified there's certain factors of their present relationship where a woman ends up
California,
murdered by her
doesn't
partner.
matter.
Correct.
Yeah, doesn't matter.
And that's one of the ways you look as to whether a woman is in a very dangerous situation.
Correct.
Finger image now. I'm looking through, and it doesn't show the finger image at all. Is it being shown? This is the YouTube channel for this? There's no image. Okay, all right, let's move on.
Can we pull up PX92?
They don't show it? Okay.
So
It's an evidence.
published to the jury.
Yeah, it will be published.
Do you know what this is?
I believe this is the knife that Miss Heard gave to Mr. Depp as a gift.
Oh, yeah.
And you speak Spanish?
Un poquito?
Do you know what it says?
Yes, it says hasta la muerta, until death.
So a woman you suggest has characteristics of being afraid for her life, gives her intimate partner a large knife, which she has inscribed until death. That's your testimony?
Well, there's context.
Oh, there's context behind this. Yes, of course. I wonder what the context is. Oh, yeah, the context of her being violent with him in the past. Yeah, I wonder what the context here is. Jesus, just the way that he frames it, man.
Okay.
The context is she's crazy.
We can do that later. So we talked about, you talked a little bit about Mr. Depp purporting to demonstrate.
Ember's smirking. No, there's a lot of people that are like that. A lot of psychologically and basically people that are, these are people that are not completely insane. They are borderline insane. And notice, remember what I said before whenever this was the previous time where she did something absolutely fucking insane and she was getting called out for it and she thought it was funny? Because she's like, wow, I really am a crazy bitch. You know, and she's doing it again. You have the self-awareness of it. Yeah, that's what it, and this is the same pattern of behavior, the same pattern of expression.